Hello, friends. Welcome for another teaching here at Buddhist Insights. So, this morning we're going to talk about how to become rich and wealthy by following the teachings of the Buddha. But before we begin, we can start by paying homage to our original teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha, the reason why we're gathered here today. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham Dhammam Sangham Namasami. And so I want to start this morning session by reading from a sutta translated by Bhante Sujato. So this is the Metta Sutta, not the usual Metta Sutta that we're used to, but the Metta Sutta that actually we find in the Itivuttaka. So I'm going to put the link of the sutta in the comments so you can click on the link and read with me. Okay. And so the sutta begins. This was said by the Buddha, the perfected one. That is what I heard. Mendicants, don't fear good deeds. For good deeds is a term for happiness, for what is likable, desirable, and agreeable. I recall undergoing for a long time the likable, desirable, and agreeable results of good deeds performed over a long time. Having developed the mind of love for 7 years, for 7 eons of the cosmos contracting and expanding, I didn't return to this world again. As the eon contracted, I went to the realm of streaming radiance. As it expanded, I was reborn in an empty mansion of divinity. There I was, the divinity, the great divinity, the vanquisher, the unvanquished, the universal seer, the wielder of power. I was Saka, Lord of gods, 36 times. Many hundreds of times I was a king, a wheel-turning monarch, a just unprincipled king. My dominion extended to all 4 sides. I achieved stability in the country, and I possessed the 7 treasures, not to mention regional kingship. Then I thought, of what deed of mine is this the fruit and result, that I'm now so mighty and powerful? Then I thought, it is the fruit and result of 3 kinds of deeds: giving, self-control, and restraint. The Buddha spoke this matter. On this it is said, one should practice only good deeds, whose happy outcome stretches ahead, giving and moral conduct, developing a mind of love. Having developed these things yielding happiness, that astute one is reborn in a happy, pleasing world. This too is a matter that was spoken by the Blessed One. That is what I heard. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So this is actually a really beautiful sutta that I wanted to share with you because also it's very practical. I love these suttas where the Buddha, is keeping it real, especially with a lot of you friends, lay people, that are not monastics. Oftentimes, us monastics get these questions like, oh, all of you're monastics, but we're here in the real world. We have to support our families. We have ambitions. We have to exist in the quote unquote real world. And it's very interesting because sometimes there can be the sort of idea or the impression that the path can be a little bit different, or the way of practice can be very different between monastics and lay people. And sometimes the goal can seem a little bit different between monastics and lay people, but actually the goal is one and the path is one. It's just that the monastics have a bit of a sort of faster, easier path. And lay people decide to take a different type of path, which is symbiotic, obviously, to the practice of monastic. It's the same path of monastics. It's symbiotic with the with the monastics, but it's just a little bit slower, right, to develop all the different qualities that we see in the Noble Eightfold Path. And in this sutta, we see that the Buddha essentially, is giving a message that is addressed to monastics, but actually it's really relevant to lay people as well. And so he, explains how in the past he has had numerous incredible, lofty states of existence, right? So he goes all the way from all the different divine states of existence, all the way to being in the world as a king, all the way to being, kind of more ordinary king, not just a sort of wheel-turning monarch, but just an ordinary king. So an experience also in the human realm that generally is very high and aspired towards, right? It means a lot of wealth, a lot of fame, a lot of honor, a lot of gain, right? And he says, okay, so I've had all these incredible, wonderful experiences where I was actually having a really good time in samsara. This was obviously before he was a fully awakened being. And so he says, what are actually the conditions? What are the causes and conditions that created these incredible states of existence, of wealth, of honor, of fame, once again, right? And he says that actually he looked for the causes and conditions, and he found that the causes and conditions that created that were giving, they were self-control, they were restraint, they were developing the mind in loving kindness. All of this created these wonderful, incredible states of existence, right? So he's keeping it also real because he's like, well, also you monastics, you should really not be afraid of actually doing these actions, because these actions, even the worst case scenario that you're not attaining full awakening in this lifetime, will still actually bring really pleasant results, right? So it's like, don't be afraid of that. Don't be afraid of merit. Merit is a synonym of happiness. And it's very interesting because when the Buddha is not talking in terms of attaining wealth, in terms of attaining honor or praise or whatnot, actually, usually that's not really the language that is used in, still the instructions are to practice giving, to practice self-control, to practice restraint, to develop a mind of loving kindness, right? And so here, I think we get into a very interesting sort of aspect of the path where I feel like it's very important to highlight that oftentimes, if we are, not monastics, if we are lay people, and if we are living in the world, and if we are, aspiring to attain wealth, it's very important to remember that whether we want to gain wealth or whether we do not want to gain wealth, whether we want to attain nibbana or we don't want to attain nibbana, right? Like the path is always the same. So if we want to attain nibbana, we definitely have to practice giving, self-control, restraint, develop a mind of loving kindness, right? If we want to attain a really wealthy state of being in samsara, the practice is exactly the same. So what is the difference, actually? I would say that the difference is that if we are accruing wealth without the wisdom of the development of the Buddhist path, that is very dangerous. So what we actually might do is, with a mind full of greed, hatred, and delusion, we are putting so much effort into amassing material wealth. And we are exhausting essentially all the good karma that we have done in the past, right? That creates the vipaka, that creates that result for this material wealth to happen. But as sensual pleasures, the Buddha tells us, are empty, hollow, and deceitful, right? So we amass all this wealth, but it's still unsatisfying. So we kind of actually, because we haven't had the support of the development of the Buddhist qualities, the wholesome qualities of the heart, then we start making bad deeds, right? We start making, we give up our sila, we start lying, we start stealing, we can do all sorts of bad things, right? That create then more and more conditions for unhappiness of the heart. You know, the Buddha tells us that many places in the suttas, the Buddha is reported to tell us, to make us consider, you know, if we think about a person who has spent their entire life amassing wealth, material wealth, right? Will they be able at the end of their life to even spend one moment, let alone an entire day, let alone an entire, you know, the rest of their life, right? In complete bliss? And he says, actually, absolutely not, right? We can see, in fact, the millionaires, the billionaires, the trillionaires, the richest people in the world today. What happens? Are they actually even peaceful? Are they blissful for one moment? No, they are planning on going to Mars. So they're planning on, you know, trying to amass even more wealth. So it's this constant anxiety. It's this constant sort of, you know, infinite hunger, infinite thirst that leads them. But instead, actually, we see that cultivating those qualities of the mind of the Buddha without even, you know, without material wealth actually creates that peace, that tranquility, and that ease for one moment, then even sometimes for half an hour, then sometimes for an hour, then sometimes for a day. And the Buddha tells us, yes, actually, the more we develop that, these teachings can allow us actually to have these incredible experiences of peace, of tranquility, of bliss for eons, even, right? So for numerous lifetimes, for millennia. So it's important that when we actually think, okay, these conditions are not in and of themselves, the conditions of material wealth are not in and of themselves evil, but they are a problem when we acquire them without the wisdom of the Buddhist teachings. Because actually, material wealth is very, very useful if we have it with wisdom, because it actually is very supportive to the practice of the Dhamma. It's very supportive to be in a relatively good condition, right, in samsara, so that we can practice more easily. If we are in a very dire situation financially, you know, if we don't have food, if we don't have requisites, then it will be very, very hard to practice, because we will be in a constant state of agony. So it is important to have a little bit of material wealth, but to understand it and to be dispassionate with it, and to actually use it in a way that is skillful, to use it without wasting it, right? Oftentimes, if we don't have the wisdom to understand the nature of material wealth, and we get intoxicated with greed, hatred, and delusion, right, we will start dissipating wealth. How many people can we read about that perhaps they win the lottery, they're intoxicated, you know, with greed, hatred, and delusion, because they've just accumulated all this wealth, and then after a very, very short time, they dissipate it all entirely, right? So yeah, the loss of wealth is a small thing, but the loss of wisdom is a big thing, because the material wealth we can actually you know, easily somewhat build it. But the wealth of wisdom is much harder to put together. But when we have that incredible wisdom, then it's much easier to also like have a good sort of material state of being. And it's a good material state of being where we're also, taking care of the people, taking care of ourselves, taking care of the people that are around us, taking care of the society at large, taking care of spiritual contemplatives. So making more and more merit that then creates more and more good conditions. So it's very, very interesting, right? So whether we want to be rich in this life, or whether we want to attain nibbana in this life, then we have to always practice in the same way. We have to practice in accordance with Dhamma. The other very important thing is that the more we practice in accordance with Dhamma, the more we get, in tune with a different type of wealth, which is not the sort of richness that usually we're bombarded with. Buy this, buy that, accumulate this, accumulate that, which creates that sort of hungry ghost state of existence. Instead, we have that peace and that calm and that tranquility that comes from that. We can call it the ghee of wealth, right? The ghee of wealth that is really the ghee of wisdom of the teachings of the Buddha. And so that we can see how it brings so much peace and happiness to the heart. So anyway, these are a few things that come to mind this morning. And I wanted to say hello to Manal, John Bays and John Ashone. We have two Johns this morning that are checking in. Hello to Jayanta, good to see you. Vanessa, Maria, Bhumika, and Infinite Logic. I hope that my English was okay, because now that I'm spending a lot of time in Italy, I'm having a bit of a harder time to speak English. And at this point, if there are any comments or questions, you can type them in and we can discuss them. I don't see anything coming up. I feel like the sutta is very self-explanatory. Okay, actually, Mani says, sometimes things don't happen as we wish. What do we do? Oh, yes, Mani, that's a very good question. Actually, I would say not sometimes. Most times things don't happen as we wish, right? So that's a great opportunity where we can really reflect on just the characteristics, of samsara, just of the fact that being in this world, we will be subject to the worldly winds, right? So that we will be subject to loss. We will be subject to sometimes gain. Sometimes we will be subject to criticism. Sometimes we will be subject to praise, and so on. And so that's what makes this situation so precarious, so perilous, right? It's not something that we can rely on. And so whenever this happens, whenever we come face to face with the disagreeable, then we can reflect on the drawbacks of samsara. We can reflect on the drawbacks of the state of existence. We can we can see, actually, we can reflect experientially on the teachings of the Buddha, on what the Buddha tells us, on the first noble truth, on the truth of suffering, seeing how, there is this experience, right, in our hearts. And then we can reflect on the cause of suffering, right, this tanha, this constant, insatiable thirst that we have. And then we can recollect that there is a way out. We can recollect that there is, in fact, a cessation of suffering, and there is a way out of suffering, and it is the cultivation of the Noble Eightfold Path. Like, we don't have to just, you know, be with this predicament forever, but actually we can cultivate the wisdom that will get us out of this predicament. All right. And hello, Bhavani. Yeah, good to hear from you. How's my practice and how is my mother? Well, yeah, it's to stay in line with the teachings that we read on this sutta here of the Buddha this morning. Yeah, it's a great opportunity to make merit, right? So my mom is not doing too well, which is why I've been in Italy um, this past year. And yeah, so my mom is providing me for a great opportunity to to do a lot of good deeds and take care of her. And yeah, so it's a different type of mm, I mean, same difference. It's the same difference of a practice. It's, whenever we are practicing Buddhism, we're always doing good deeds. But right now, it's a little bit of a different environment. Obviously, I'm not living in a monastery. I'm in a home, her home, my mom's home in Rome. And I'm taking care of her as best as I can. And yeah, and seeing all the results of the practice that the Buddha is telling us. Okay. And Manuel says, I stated the ghee of wealth. I don't know if I heard correctly. What did you mean by this, please? Yes. So the ghee, I said the ghee of wealth because what I was trying to say is that the ghee, is this the most kind of the best sort of type of dairy product, right? It goes through a lot of different removals of the impurities, removals of all the sort of gross elements when you start from butter and then you arrive to ghee. And so this is very present, actually, this metaphor throughout the suttas, where the Buddha, in fact, praises ghee. It's also praised, actually, in Ayurveda for its, in fact, incredible pure quality. And so it's something that is superior. This is why I was saying the ghee of wealth. It's like the best, the foremost. It's not just some kind of random coarse wealth, richness that we usually think about when we're talking about, oh, I want to become rich, I want to attain that type of wealth. Usually it's something that is very, very coarse. And so we can relate to that when we think, for example, about of little children. When we were also a little child, when we were thinking in terms of wealth and acquiring richness, usually we're thinking in terms of toys. And when we are children, the toys seem very, very true, very real, like very, very much something that we need to aspire to, something that will make us happy. And then we attain them, and yeah, there's a bit of happiness, but then we're back to square one. And then at a certain point, we outgrow them. So we become a little bit older and we're like, okay, I'm not interested in those toys anymore. And then we look at children and we're like, there might be a little bit of condescension in our hearts. They're like, oh, that's cute, but how silly, that perhaps they're fighting for that, like, plastic doll, for example, or that little plastic car, or they're fighting for dirt, as it may be, right? We're like, oh, that's really not worth putting all that energy into it. That's really silly, because we have outgrown that. We have come to a sort of higher understanding of what actually wealth is, but it's still very coarse. And so in the practice of Dhamma, as we are really making good deeds, as we are practicing sila, as we are practicing virtue, as we are practicing giving, as we are cultivating the mind, the heart, right? We are actually once again, also accumulating some material wealth. in the meanwhile, because it's the natural product of all of these conditions. You develop all of these qualities, and you make this type of karma, and you will develop this vipaka. It's natural, but you're developing it with wisdom. And so then that becomes a superior type of wealth. It's the wealth of wisdom. It's not the wealth of, oh, now I have a nice house. Oh, now I have a nice thingabob. So there is, there's a superior wealth, and then there's also a hunger for something that is more sublime. There is the desire to attain awakening. There is the desire to attain cessation, the ending of samsara. And so it's what I guess I was trying to say, the ghee of wealth. That's the ghee of yes, I want, the supreme bliss of nibbana. I hope that makes sense. And Vanessa says, we're often raised to think money is the source of all evil plus greed. And as a Buddhist, there is often guilt with wanting to gain wealth. How can we change this to a more skillful mindset? Thank you, Vanessa. Yes. So usually there is that type of conversation in terms of money as the source of all evil, because acquiring wealth in an unwise way then usually actually is the source of all evil. It's not the money itself, but it's the acquisition without wisdom, because then one will act out of greed, hatred, and delusion, being very, very intoxicated, right? So it's like a bit of, consuming, like giving basically drugs to a drug addict, alcohol to an alcoholic. Then if they have infinite amounts of that, then they will start making some really, really bad choices. And a lot of bad consequences, bad actions will be made upon that. So the very, very important thing to do is wanting to gain the wealth, the supreme wealth, the one that we were talking just right now with mana, the supreme wealth of nibbana. And so understanding, focusing, redirecting, the mind towards like, okay, in order to attain nibbana, it's very, very useful to have also some like good conditions materially. So how about I work to attain these material conditions with a different intention, which is not the intention of like accumulating a bunch of junk, but rather it's like, okay, how about I do all this work so I can attain this material wealth so that I can support my family, for example, so I can support my friends, so I can support the Sangha, so I can support the teachings of the Buddha, right? That bring happiness and peace to the heart, right? So I can actually create some provisions so that in case, something happens, especially now with climate change, there might be all sorts of, destruction and craziness that is going to happen. But, if I accumulate a little bit, not accumulate a lot, but actually if I work and get a little bit of that wealth going on, then I can protect the people that I care about. So always having that sort of carefulness towards people around us, that I like, I guess, nourishing a healthy identity of a benefactor. So always thinking this wealth is not just to buy more things on such and such online store, but rather this wealth can be used for the greater good, right? For the greater good of society at large. And then that ultimately includes myself, because whenever one is also taking care of others, naturally, others are going to take care of you. It's very, very simple. But if we start being so concerned with ourselves, like, oh, how am I going to buy that dress? How I'm going to do that? How I'm going to go and travel in this place and this other place? Like, oh, I need to make more money. We're going to be so self-absorbed that then the only thing that we will have left is those $5 in the bank that Maybe we'll be too old to even be able to spend them. And we had spent our entire life being so self-absorbed that we haven't developed any good connection with others. So then nobody is going to actually take care of us. So, because, who's that person, right? So when instead we are constantly taking care of others, then naturally that's another beautiful consequence, which shouldn't be, of course, our foremost thought, like, oh, let me do these things so then people will like me more. I'm not suggesting that, but rather developing, once again, the wisdom that understands causes, conditions, and consequences. And whenever we are, looking at our community, looking around, looking out for others, and also being smart, wise to also look up for ourselves, which doesn't mean, once again, developing greed, but actually means, okay, like, let me also, I am just one of everyone else in the community. So I need to take care. May everybody be happy, including myself. May everybody be healthy, including myself. Right? So dedicating to every single being, including ourselves, a thought of loving kindness, a thought of care, carefulness, care. So I hope that makes sense. Bhavani says, now that you're taking care of your mother, will the attachment factor be a problem? Oh, yes, absolutely. It's very, very interesting, actually, to deal with one's parents. I lost my dad last year, so it's something that it's inevitable. Each one of us has to go through this. And it's very powerful, very painful, but very powerful, very useful to really contemplate the teachings of the Buddha. Because especially our parents, since we have memory, we were born, they were both there, or at least one of them, right? Or our parental figures. So they kind of have this sort of, I realized, in the mind, even though we know they're impermanent, they kind of like have this sort of impression on the mind, a little bit like the sun and the moon, like they're always there, kind of like every day you're like, oh, there's the sun and the moon, like it's difficult to conceive of an experience of the world where there's not the sun anymore, or there's not the moon anymore. So we take it very much for granted. And then when one of them dies, there's this, whoa, real shock, because also usually our entire life takes an incredibly different turn because of it being such a pillar in our life. And so it's the same thing with taking care of one's parents, with the old age and sickness, then actually our parents aren't the ones that are taking care of us anymore, but it switches around. We need to start taking care of our parents. And also that is a little bit destabilizing. And there's a lot of attachment towards something that we have, that was in the past, that we had grown to be acquainted to. We had grown to create a pattern towards that, like of, that also perhaps created certain senses of safety, of stability, of at least familiarity, even in the sort of most perhaps unhealthy family dynamic. At least it's something familiar, and there's something reassuring in even the most kind of toxic sort of familiar thing. So it's this destabilizing to go through that. And so we see all of our different attachments to how we think things should be. And, also we have changed a lot ourselves, but perhaps we are thrown back into a dynamic that was very present when we were growing up. So there's a big, big tangle. And this is, once again, always a great opportunity to go back to the teachings of the Buddha. So the Four Noble Truths, the first noble truth of dukkha, the second noble truth of the cause of dukkha. And then, recollecting, there's the third noble truth, there is a cessation of dukkha, and the way out of dukkha, the fourth noble truth, is always the same. So we always go back to the path. It's not like, oh, okay, well, I'm Buddhist monastic, now I'm enlightened. I wish it was that way. It would have been great. But no, actually, what it is that whenever we take these ropes on, we're just like 100%, everything is, a full on Dharma. But it should be like that also for the lay people. It's just that you have a different form of practice, right? So always bringing back everything to the Dharma, looking at how attachment manifests in the heart and learning how to let it go, seeing how painful it is when we don't let it go, seeing how blissful it is when we manage to let it go. And so with this micro understanding, and the situational awareness, you might call it, then we can actually have a bit of a broader sense of the path, broader sense of like really the beauty of the teachings of the Buddha. I hope this makes sense. Okay, and so that was the last question this morning. I think I'm going to see you all again next week at a certain point. So for now, we can end it here. Thank you for all of your beautiful questions and for bearing with my broken English. And I wish for all of you to be well, happy, and peaceful, and may all good things come to you. And so we can end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.